Good morning. We'll try to get some time back on here. Again, Cara Delia, and just as you all have been hearing, AI Readiness is a strategic initiative of FINOS, and we're excited to have an illustrious panel today. Maybe just go down and, while we got your titles, Emily, Ian, Colin, maybe explain how you're working with AI right now.
So it's really great to be here this morning. Emily Prince, I'm the Group Head of Analytics. So I think it goes without saying that for most of us, we can imagine the role of AI having a pretty profound effect. I think sometimes, and certainly an area that we focus on, is just how profound that can be from an end user perspective. So we'll talk about this, I think, a little bit later, but for me, a lot of what we're focused on is how do we liberate and open up information in a way that it becomes much more accessible based on the intent of end users.
Yeah, and actually I think that really resonates with me and my role as well, where I am here to look after our developers, make it very easy and enjoyable to deliver great software, in the very heavily regulated environment that we operate in. That democratization of the new capabilities we're seeing coming out, and making sure that we have frictionless ways for everyone to access that and develop compelling new features for our clients is absolutely key.
Cool, thank you. I'm Colin Eberhardt, CTO of Scott Logic. And I guess in very simple terms, I'm interested in the power that AI has to improve our lives, both our personal lives and our professional lives, across a great many different industries and a great many different sort of roles. I think AI has a lot to offer almost everyone.
Ian, I'm going to start with you. How do you balance the internal silos, legacy architecture around and models and capability for AI adoption? So how do you really work with your models and the capabilities of those in AI adoption? And I will ask a two-part question around regulators.
Yeah, so I guess it's an interesting field because leveraging AI in financial services is nothing new. So, we do have existing robust approaches to doing that safely and in a regulatory compliant way. But on the other hand, we are seeing, a dramatic change in capability, particularly around the new era of SaaS-hosted pre-trained off-the-shelf large language models that I think are bringing a number of new challenges, and we do have to break out of the old approaches that we have to really enable them. And I think the other point I'd just pick on is one thing that's obviously clear to everyone is the accessibility of AI has really changed. And responding to that and leveraging these new capabilities does require a brand new look at how we're approaching that.
And from the other panelists, do you have any thoughts to share or add?
I think maybe one thing I would add is, I'll pick on a point earlier. I think with Colin mentioned, there's a really galvanizing aspect of AI that is very powerful. And the scale of the potential is arguably unlike anything we've ever seen across lots of different industries and roles at the same time. And so I think there's an acute focus on what is the use case, what is the problem that we're solving for, and what does success look like. And buried in there is also a very keen understanding of what are the risks that we are presenting into this, and do we have suitability. So I see that coming through to the fore as we get the benefit of the democratization that is presented, making sure we have that discipline on what does success look like, but also do we have suitability based on the use cases that we're presenting. And actually, when we think about model risk, that takes you into a segregation between those more deterministic and non-deterministic aspects.
Yeah, and to extend on that, I think, Ian, you make a fantastic point about AI being accessible to all. I'm glad you didn't use the word democratization. That bugs me every time people say that, democratization of technology. But more specifically, one of the things that I think is a challenge for a lot of users of AI is we've grown up in a world where computers are deterministic. They tend to tell the truth. With generative AI, it's non-deterministic, unpredictable, creative, incredibly useful, but it doesn't always tell the truth. So I think it's a new tool, it's a very powerful tool, but I think we have to form a new mental model for how we're going to engage with AI and potentially with computers.
Well, in dealing with regulators who do want you to understand what is determined, there are regulations coming out. How are you working with regulators in your roles?
I mean, I think this is an excellent point to mention the AI Readiness SIG and our that Colin and I are co-chairing, and there's very good reason why our goals are focused around regulatory compliance, and for precisely the points raised, which is that we are dealing with an unprecedented step change in capability. We know that that's going to continue for a little while yet. There are some very exciting new expansions of that capability in the works. And our regulatory environment of yesterday, our internal controls of yesterday, are not well equipped to cope with that. And I think both my colleagues here mentioned that the non-deterministic nature of the models, which is really key. I think you have to come up with an approach that embraces that really, in a very structured and detailed manner, breaks down the risks and the threats that you're addressing. And the goal we have certainly for our collaboration on this is to come up with a menu card of mitigants that everyone can leverage, because ultimately we all have the same goal, which is we want to provide access to compelling new features for our clients, compelling new services that this technology opens up. But we all have a very important duty to play in doing that safely. Collectively, we are structurally important to all the world economies. If we get things wrong, people don't get paid. They can't, they can't make their regular day-to-day transactions. So it's absolutely vital that we adopt this new technology in a safe way. But equally, we're commercial organizations. We have to do that in a very cost-effective manner, and that really goes back to the power of foundations like FINOS and everything that Gab said earlier, which is, we are all operating under a common regulatory environment, so it just makes sense to come together to do that.
One little point I'd make there is that human beings are inherently non-deterministic, and human beings make mistakes, whether they're working in a call center or whether they're an equity researcher. They make mistakes. We have regulatory frameworks that accommodate the non-determinism of human beings. Is it possible that we could have regulatory frameworks that accommodate non-deterministic computers?
Well, in speaking of framework, in the AI readiness, there is a framework that we're working on. Do you anticipate that regulators will be able to participate in the building of the framework with the community?
Yeah, so to explain in a little bit more detail, with the AI Readiness SIG, we have a goal to make it easier for financial services organizations and FINOS members to onboard, develop, and deploy AI technology into production. And to do that, we're following a deeply practical path of creating a governance framework. So the idea being, we're going to explore AI architectures. We're going to use the tried and tested approach of threat modeling the risks, and then looking to put in place suitable controls, so that if you're developing an AI application, you should be able to, through this governance framework, be able to demonstrate that firstly, you've identified your risks and quantified them, and secondly, demonstrated that you've put in place suitable controls, which don't always entirely remove the risk altogether, but at least allow you to demonstrate a level of risk reduction. So when you talk about the regulators, things like the EU AI Act, for example, it's not finalized yet. We don't know what the future AI-specific regulations are going to be, but we do already know that we have to adhere to existing regulations, whether they relate to personal data or whether they relate to data sovereignty, for example. So through this framework, I feel confident that we will be able to address future AI-specific regulation, but also there is going to be an open invite to the regulators to participate. I'm hoping that we'll be able to speak a common language.
Absolutely, couldn't have put that better. And I think it's important to acknowledge, which I'm sure all of you already know, that our relationship with the regulators is not an adversarial one. And we have, over the course of our careers in this room, already seen a huge amount of regulatory change, and we are an immensely safer industry than we were 10, 20 years ago. So I think we can absolutely anticipate that the regulatory environment is going to continue to evolve, and by coming together and having a collective view on how we adequately manage our risks, and how we express them, we can only help them do that faster to our collective advantage.
So you can't talk about AI and leave out data. Emily, I'll ask this question of you. You mentioned earlier about what are we solving for. So in looking at data architecture, what do you find as the opportunities and challenges with the use cases that we've mentioned today?
Yeah, it does come up quite a bit. I think, and then actually in all of the pieces of work that I've done also with customers, this is often sitting at the forefront and quickly followed by the word trust. And what we're seeing is, yes, there are the questions you would expect in terms of quality, which kind of comes back to your question of, do you have the quality intent that is required for the use case that you're trying to solve for? But there's another layer, and that first piece, that first dynamic is not unfamiliar to us. Actually, we've been talking about that for decades. But the second dynamic of, can I trust the thing that I'm seeing, is a new dynamic that is now at scale of, when you're surfacing content from a document, from data set, in your AI system, is that something that you can stand behind as an organization? Which brings about an interesting dynamic of, which problem are you solving again? So what is your tolerance in terms of the data that is being surfaced and the problem that you're trying to solve for, and where do you need the level, and what level of trust do you need in it? Meaning, do you have two people that have validated that information as being suitable for the use cases that you are presenting, so that you as an organization can stand behind that in presenting a report or whatever the end product is from a use case? But one of the things that I find very important is, again, I'll go back to that kind of separation of use cases, is that if you're thinking about this from the perspective of, I need a comparator, I need to be able to get in highly precise comparator that is going to improve the performance of a human-performed deterministic task, actually you probably want to be quite open in terms of your specification, in terms of inclusion of data in those aspects. But across the board, what we see is a real emphasis on what information is being exposed into your system, and can you trust it? And this is something that we're seeing very consistently in terms of, beyond the training data sets are used, what information is presented and surfaced up through your AI powered chat interfaces or whatever end product that you are using. I also see it as a real step change, where for many, many years I've seen a lot of people struggling with, how do I make more of my own proprietary content? How do I do more with it? How do I commingle it in a way that I can get more out of it? I do see this as also the same step point where you are actually seeing that become at scale, and with the same frameworks that we've introduced in other types of content sets being extended. So it is a very interesting time.
Any additional thoughts? No? Okay, well, so you do mention trust, and obviously there are reputational risks associated with AI. And so why should we care about the data that is coming from the trained model? You kind of touched on it, but could you go maybe a little bit deeper in any trends that you might be seeing in this?
Yeah, I think when you think about again, it comes back to accountability, and I think we'll spend a lot of time. Do you feel like you've got accountability for the information that was used in training or otherwise, or not? And it's a very simple question, but an incredibly important one. And again, it comes back to, which problem are you solving for? Do you have that accountability? And particularly as we see the availability of lots of unstructured information being presented, we're going to see increasing pressure and challenge to introduce other types of information that maybe haven't gone through the types of validation that we would historically expect. So the understanding of, actually I'll weave it back into some of the regulatory points made earlier, understanding those guardrails and what we're collectively responsible for, making sure we've got the explainability, the topology on the data, is of paramount importance. I can't emphasize it enough.
No, I think that's a really key point, and for me, this actually links back to selecting the right use case. And if you're trying to solve the wrong use case with this latest generation of pre-trained AI models, and you require that absolutely rigid traceability of data, you're clearly going to fail. It's just not the right tool for the job. So I think it really is key that as we gain familiarity with the capability of those models, we also always take a step back and think about, are we actually using the right tool for the job, not just the latest and sexiest one that we've found.
And I'm going to take a completely different angle on the question. I think when it comes to understanding the data that was used to train these foundational models, I think it's incredibly important that we know what that data is. But partly, as you mentioned, to determine the efficacy of the model, is it going to produce the right results? But also there's the legal and ethical side as well. For a number of the commercial models, we don't know what data they were trained on. A number of them are trained on publicly accessible works, whether that's blog posts, journalistic articles, or let's say, for example, code that was sat on GitHub. And they use the argument of fair use. And fair use was developed as a concept many years ago to support, for example, journalists, to allow them to sort of summarize a book or a film without violating copyright, or researchers who could perform statistical analysis on bodies of work without violating copyright. Fair use wasn't developed at a point in time where AI existed, and I do feel that there's some ethical issues there, for example, knowing that some of my code that is on GitHub was used to train Copilot. I like using Copilot, but I'm still slightly uncomfortable that I was part of the process of building that model. So I think there's a massive ethical issue here, which I think is still to play out.
Yeah, and actually, sorry, Oscar, that's just a riff on what Colin said there. And actually, you'd have hopefully seen the press about Citi's adoption of Copilot. That's definitely not the only AI assistance we're going to offer our developers, but we've moved very quickly to make that available to everyone. And one of the interesting challenges around intellectual property that I personally hit against there was there is an IP filter that's designed to make sure that it's not verbatim suggesting code that it's been trained on, which doesn't obviate the issue that Colin mentioned. But one of the problems I had is, well, what if you're actually planning to contribute back to an open source project? Well, what I found is when I was trying to work on that from within Citi, then actually the IP filtering was preventing Copilot from making suggestions back to me, because of course it was actually sourced directly from GitHub that was in my context. Obviously that's a relatively easy thing to fix, but yeah, there are new boundaries for working out how these controls can be applied effectively.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about talent management. Your work with developers daily. How would you say that they are being affected by AI adoption? In many ways, they could see it as a hype cycle, disruptive. Do you find that the barrier for skills is high or low?
Yeah, I'm sure this will be slightly controversial, but at least in our experience, if we look at technologists now starting to look how to incorporate, the latest generation of models into their solutions. We have not found that prompt engineering, for example, has been as big a barrier as we thought it might be initially. And actually, at least our experience is that people have picked up those skills, and there's a lot of resource online that helps people leverage the models. And of course, with each generation of model that comes out, that also changes again. So in terms of our technical team's ability to adopt and use the technology, the barrier is much more about how we do that safely than necessarily the skills gap that we might have.
Let me build on that one. I think one thing I would add is that it depends, again, not to be a broken record, but again, depends what you're solving for. If you're solving for productivity, then the accessibility I completely agree with. But if you're really trying to use this to differentiate and build new types of products, that's where we start to run into the skills gap. And I'll break that into two parts. One of the areas that we're really kind of building around at the moment is the domain expertise that we have in different segments. Call that anything from exotics to swaps to lots of different segments, lots of different areas of domain specialism. Could think of model risk in its own right as one of those. And actually managing to curate that domain knowledge in a way that we can get the right level of accuracy. I worry about this on a go-forward basis. Today it might be fine. We might have all earned our stars and stripes doing the heavy lifting, hard work of an analyst all the way through. But in a go-forward manner, when we think we haven't necessarily had our junior talent going through and earning those stars and stripes, will we get the same level of deep domain expertise, and how do we foster that triangle of domains so that we have an ongoing level of technical understanding in the systems that we're building and ultimately critical thinking?
Yeah, and I'm going to respectfully disagree with Ian to a certain extent in that I think the basic task of prompt engineering, I think developers, and you don't have to be a developer to take to that. Prompt engineering is how you interface with these systems. You direct it, you ask it questions, and you learn how to direct it better. Funnily enough, asking it to reason about what it's doing or offering it a digital cookie typically gives a better response, which is a bit weird. But I think that a bigger challenge that people are facing with engineering generative AI systems is, once again, tackling the non-determinism. Within software engineering, we are very used to and very comfortable working in a world of determinism. You know, we lean on our CI and CD systems with 100% test pass. If a test fails, we don't merge the pull request. We operate in a deterministic world. Generative AI does not fit that model. So whilst the act of prompt engineering, I agree, people learn that relatively quickly. How you then turn that into a production system that repeatably operates within guardrails that don't necessarily prescribe the behavior in such a way that you would traditionally, that's hard.
No, I think that's completely fair, and the parallel I would personally draw is leveraging SaaS products in general, because you're dependent on the vendor. You know, you'll also be partnering very closely with your major vendors, but they're going to be innovating, and one of the massive benefits of going to a SaaS model is that you're generally always on latest. So you don't have that same level of certainty that we did back in the day when we used to handcraft everything ourselves. And I think this is just, as you say, Colin, another step in that direction.
So fast forward to next year, sitting on this stage talking about AI or generative AI. What do you think is the opportunities for open source, or what do you think will be the trend then, or the big topic?
Well, I'm going to plug AI readiness again. I think one of the problems I have with generative AI is there's a big gap between the capability that I know it has and what I have in my hands as an end user and as a consumer. There's a massive gap between ChatGPT, which isn't really an end user product. It's techies and people who are tech curious use it. The comparable device that the end user has are things like Alexa, and my God, is Alexa dumb in comparison. To me, again, maybe it's an open source opportunity. I think it's an opportunity for everyone. There's a massive gap between the capability we have and what we're putting in front of consumers as packaged solutions. Opportunities are everywhere there.
Yeah, and I think and again, I'm going to shamelessly plug the AI Readiness SIG. I think what I'm certainly seeing is that we have just a new set of capabilities, very accessible capabilities open to us, and actually we've got a huge backlog of small little innovative ideas that are working their way through our now somewhat outdated control processes. And that's actually why I think the work that we're sponsoring is just so important, because we have to unlock that. We have to be able to move at the same pace we do with all of the more familiar technologies. So what I very much hope is that next year it's more of a story of breaking new boundaries rather than just accessing the capability that we know is there.
I'll actually build on it. I completely agree with the earlier points. I'll just, maybe one additional aspect I'll bring in is, this is not just emanating from financial services or just from the developer community. This is every single segment. Actually, point was made earlier that this is for everyone. This was relevant to everyone, from a personal trainer trying to build a business to, it is truly across every single spectrum. And actually it's in those lesser regulated industries that we're seeing some of the fastest innovation that is actually occurring. So there's going to be a growing tension as we uphold the regulatory standards and policies and expectations of this community, whilst we see those fast-paced developments happening around us. So I see that pressure between what is possible and what is accessible growing over the next year.
Thank you so much to our panelists. I'd like to thank you for your time and for your insights.